George Adamski, 1950, the first UFO contacted. Anybody who studies flying saucers will invariably hear the name of George Adamski. Adamski was a controversial figure who popped up in the early 1950s. He was a kind of jack of all trades, even doing a stint in the U.S. cavalry in 1913. During Prohibition, he came up with a scheme to sell wine, founded a monastery, and started his very own order of monks. He called it the Royal Order of Tibet, despite the fact that it was located in Southern California. Anyway, since it was a religious order, he could sell all the wine he could make. Mount Palomar. During World War II or shortly thereafter, Adamski opened a hamburger stand near the Mount Palomar Observatory. Either the close proximity to Palomar or his burger's secret sauce got his juices going, and he started referring to himself as Professor Adamski. Over the next few years, Adamski claimed he had seen flying saucers near Mount Palomar Observatory on at least 200 different occasions. A trip to Venus. Adamski had many supporters, and in 1952 he claimed to have met human-looking aliens who said that they were from the planet Venus. He also said he had been taken aboard spacecraft and taken to other planets in our solar system, which he described in vivid detail in several books. The controversy. The controversy surrounding George Adamski is thick. First, the conditions he describes on the various planets are known to be impossible. There was also a dispute about the photographs he said he took of the craft. Adding to this, the intelligence agencies of the U.S. and British governments befriended Adamski and sponsored a speaking tour around the world, and nobody knows right from left. To this very day, there are those who will swear that everything he said was true, and equally as many who say he was a con man. Since he died in 1965, none of these people have ever met him anyway. Some stuff checks out. Some of the things attributed to Adamski have proven to be accurate, specifically his descriptions and drawings of the spacecraft now commonly referred to as Adamski beam ships. These saucers look like an inverted bell with the top of the dome squared off. The most prominent features are what look like three equally spaced balls attached to the bottom of the saucer. Since Adamski's claims were made in the 1950s, this type of craft has been seen by thousands of other people around the world. Adamski's drawings were dead on. He said Venus, we didn't. More recent contactees have been told by alien beings that the people they encountered in the 1950s frequently made the erroneous assumption they were from a planet in our solar system such as Venus. Rather than confuse the poor contactee, the aliens just said that they were from the fourth or fifth planet. Alien beings have also said that in all cases they were being accurate, but they did not specify which solar system or which dimension they were from. It is hard enough for people to understand it now, much less the early 1950s. In 1950 the movie Monster Godzilla didn't even exist. The Allagash Affair. This case involves four credible witnesses. In 1976 four buddies, Chuck Rock, Charlie Foltz, and Jack and Jim Weiner decided to take a camping trip. All the men were students majoring in art. They left on August 20th, a Friday evening, and drove out of Boston to a remote area, a lake on the Allagash Waterway. When they arrived at the lake they set up camp on the lake's beach. They built a large bonfire which they knew from experience would last about between 4 and 5 hours. Then they hopped into the two canoes they had brought and headed out to do some night fishing. It was pitch black out on the lake and they planned on using the bonfire as a beacon to find their way back to the campsite. Somebody's watching. Shortly after moving to the center of the lake, Chuck got a strange feeling as if someone were looking at him. Turning around, he saw a huge ball of light hovering about 200 feet above a distant section of the lake. Chuck pointed at the object and said, "Hey, look." The others turned to see a bright, perfectly round sphere of light pulsating and changing colors. Charlie grabbed a flashlight and blinked it on and off at the object. The sphere, which had begun to slowly rise up, immediately stopped. Then it slowly headed towards Charlie and his buddies, growing in size as it approached. "Paddle." The guys panicked and began rowing for their lives, not knowing what this strange glowing thing was. As they furiously paddled, a hollow cone of pale blue light shot out of the sphere and began advancing on the water towards their canoes. At that point they all blanked out. The fishermen get caught. The next thing they remembered was being back on the beach and getting out of their canoes. The object was still hovering overhead. Standing there, dazed, they looked at the object for 2 or 3 minutes before it shot off at super speed, straight up into the night sky, and disappeared. All four men felt strange and disoriented. Despite the appearance and disappearance of a very strange object, none of them felt like talking about it. They did, however, notice that their bonfire had burned down completely, leaving only a few hot embers. To their knowledge, they had only been gone for about 30 minutes. The fire should have lasted at least 4 hours. This later turned out to be a classic case of missing time. Strangers in the bedroom. Several years later, Jim Weiner suffered a head injury. The injury caused a form of epilepsy known as temporal limbic epilepsy. As part of his treatment, he was asked if he was having any strange experiences. Jim then stated that he was having very strange and lifelike dreams. He also frequently awoke to find strange creatures in his room at the foot of his bed. Jim's doctor referred him to Raymond Fowler, a serious UFO researcher. Back in time, Fowler had Jim hypnotically regressed, and the whole story about his camping trip to the Allagash waterway came out. Jim and his 3 buddies had been picked up on the lake by the beam of light that had followed them. They were all taken aboard a spacecraft. They were examined and had samples of blood, semen, and urine taken. Skin, hair, and nail samples were taken as well. Cross-references and drawings. All 4 witnesses to the Allagash incident confirmed the experience of the others. All their descriptions matched. All the men were artists and were able to provide detailed drawings of what they had seen. The drawings included the alien beings, the surroundings, and the instrumentation used for their examinations. Double your pleasure, double your fun. The aliens were particularly interested in Jim and his twin brother Jack. It turns out that these twins had been abducted almost since birth. Years later, in May 1988, Jack was abducted again along with his wife, Mary. Jack recalls that they were literally floated out of the house and across the lawn to a waiting craft, a foreign object. Shortly after Jack and his wife were abducted, Jack found a strange lump on his leg. It seemed to appear out of nowhere overnight. Jack's family physician was concerned that the lump might be cancerous and arranged to have a surgeon remove it. When the surgeon went in, he found a small, strange-looking object. Since he didn't know what it was and had never seen anything like it, the surgeon sent it to the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. The Air Force steps in. Later, in trying to find out what happened to the removed object, Jack discovered it was sent to a military pathologist in Washington, D.C. From there, United States Air Force colonel took control of it, and it was never seen again. When Jack went to ask the surgeon more about the object, the surgeon stonewalled him and refused to talk about it even though Jack had been his patient. The full account and all the aftermath is vividly recounted in Raymond E. Fowler's book The Allagash Abductions, An Iowa Family. I included this case because it represents many aspects of cases that occur. That is, there are a series of events that may involve not only family members but also friends and neighbors as witnesses. This is a case that was followed closely by experienced investigators from MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. The main investigators were Beverly Trout, Irene Barnes, Lawrence Lacey, and Robert Lyon. The entire case history was originally published in the January 1998 issue of the MUFON Journal. How it started. On August 7, 1997, Bob, who was 21, was driving his 11-year-old nephew to visit his grandmother, Bob's mom. As they were driving through Stone State Park, they could see an amber light through the trees which appeared to be going in the same direction at the same speed they were going. As they rounded a curve, they could see that the object was quite large, about 70 feet in length, the size of a 7-story building laying on its side. The object was triangular in shape with 3 lights defining its perimeter. It then banked to the right and came so close to them they could clearly see the detail of its underside. Both Bob and his nephew were a little freaked out and frightened by the whole experience. I've seen this kind of thing before. The incident triggered the memory of 2 other incidents that had happened to Bob. 2 years before, Bob and another friend had seen a blinding bright light suddenly appear in a bathroom. The light just seemed to emanate from thin air, with no apparent source. Bob saw several 4-foot-high beings. His friend also saw them. In another instance, Bob remembered translucent angels that appeared at the foot of his bed. Bob's sister had had some strange experiences of her own like this. She said men with bumpy skin and webbed hands had been standing by her closet. Wild Kingdom. Back to August 7th. As Bob and his nephew turned off the main road, just after seeing the craft close up, something ran into their car, hitting hard against the side. They looked out the window and saw a fur-covered animal that was very muscular with a hump on its back. It was snarling, with huge teeth and blood-red eyes. Needless to say, they freaked and put the pedal to the metal to get to Grandma's. Chupacabra? Although this report sounds a little strange, it's not. There are many reports from around the world identical to this one. This creature also fits the description of the creature seen in Central and South America known as a chupacabra. There are all kinds of bizarre creatures which appear in heavily wooded areas when UFOs are around. It's almost as if the aliens are letting the zoo loose for a little run and exercise. Hunters have also been chased by huge creatures they could hear and smell crashing through the brush. but could not see. The hunters swear they were being chased by something completely invisible. The light in the house appearing from nowhere is very common, too. In fact, it is a standard precursor to an abduction experience, as well as beings hiding in the bedroom closet. Yeah, I know it sounds like a boogeyman thing, but grown, sane, and otherwise sophisticated adults have told me over and over again that alien beings will first appear in bedroom closets and then come through the door of the closet. And, I mean through the wood panel, without opening the door. At Grandma's house. After they arrived at Grandma's, all three members of the family saw an orange globe about a mile away. The globe pulsated and then split into two smaller globes. They continued to watch this display for 20 minutes. Later that night, Bob's young nephew had a strange nightmare in which he became paralyzed and felt a needle being stuck into him. Strange marks. 3 days later, on August 10th, the grandmother noticed unusual puncture wounds on the boy's fingers and toes. Several weeks later, from August 20th to 24th, the grandmother and some of her neighbors watched nightly as strange lights flew around the sky within a mile of her home. On several occasions, using binoculars, they could clearly see the triangular outline of the flying craft. On 2 occasions, the craft flew directly over her house. On August 27th, the grandmother felt itching sensations on her thighs. To her dismay, there had appeared overnight large red welts on her legs. In the middle of some of the welts were obvious puncture wounds. Later that same day, Bob took his nephew home. It took 3 times longer than usual, and Bob could not account for the lost time. I wish this month would end. Towards the end of the month, Bob saw the ferocious-looking humpback beast again. Bob's sister saw another strange animal that looked like a cross between a dog and a deer. She had never seen anything like it before. A month later, on September 23rd, Bob and his sister saw a silver flying disc that came towards them. They panicked and drove off. On September 28th, Bob had a large cigar-shaped craft fly over him. He could clearly see several rectangular windows on the ship. Bob felt as if he were getting communications from the beings in the craft. Bob and his family are now fairly certain they have been abducted. Oscar's story. This case is a story told to me by a personal friend of mine named Oscar. Whenever I meet someone, I make no secret of the fact that I have a great amount of interest in flying saucers. First, it keeps me true to who I am and what I am about. I am willing to listen to all kinds of guff from skeptics. As I said before, skepticism is an essential part of our growth process and the acceptance of the realization that we are not alone in the universe. Secondly, it frees people to tell me things they have experienced, things they have told no one else. Look, when someone comes forward to tell me about their flying saucer experiences, their demeanor changes. They start speaking in low tones. They invariably look around to see if anyone else is listening. It is not uncommon for them to unconsciously move 2 to 3 feet away from anybody else in the vicinity. By the looks on their faces, you can tell the event affected them deeply and still does, no matter how many years have passed since their experience. These are the moments I live for. When I see the look, I know I've struck gold and I'm about to hear a remarkable true experience. Such was the case with Oscar. Late one afternoon, after a long day of meetings, I casually mentioned to Oscar that I was going back to my room to read some stuff about flying saucers. He got real quiet, but he got the look on his face. He said, "Okay, I'll see you in the morning. I like to arrive at meetings early to kind of stake out my space. Usually, I'm the first one there, but not this time." Oscar was waiting for me. With great trepidation, here is what he told me. A man of God. The priest at Oscar's church had privately told him this story. The priest grew up in the Philippines. As a young boy, he remembered one year that a new kid showed up at school. It turned out that this kid was absolutely brilliant in his schoolwork. He was a phenomenal athlete. He was also very popular. The priest remembers that after several months, the teacher began asking to meet the boy's parents. However, the boy always deferred or made up some kind of excuse. This was really odd because the town was so small that everyone knew everyone else and their families. Nobody knew this kid's family. And no one really knew where he lived. One day, the priest and several of his friends decided to follow the new kid home. The kid headed out through some sugarcane fields and eventually, he came to a clearing. To the shock of the boys who were following, there was a small spacecraft of some kind sitting in the clearing. A door opened, and the kid walked in. The ship then lifted off and shot into the sky at a speed the boys had never seen before. To this day, the priest maintains that every single word he told Oscar is true. The Mantell case. This case involves the circumstances surrounding the death of Kentucky Air National Guard Captain Thomas F. Mantell Jr. Mantell was flying in an F-51 fighter plane along with 2 other Air National Guard planes. All 3 pilots spotted a large UFO moving slowly overhead. It was also reported by the Kentucky State Police and many citizens on the ground. "I'm closing in for a better look." These were the words Mantell radioed in as he and the other 3 pilots climbed to intercept the UFO. None of the planes were equipped with oxygen, and the planes were running low on fuel. The other 2 pilots turned back after reaching 22,000 feet. At the time, Air National Guard regulations stated you had to have oxygen on board to exceed 14,000. Mantell continued to climb until 30,000 feet. Pilot loses consciousness. Mantell's plane then went into a spin. The plane crashed and Mantell was killed. Mantell was still strapped to his seat and his watch had stopped at 3:18 p.m., the time of impact. It was well known that weather balloons were often flying in the area. Initially, it appeared Mantell had simply chased a weather balloon too high, lost consciousness from a lack of oxygen, and crashed. Now, as radio announcer Paul Harvey used to say, here's the rest of the story. The commander of Godman Air Base was personally watching the UFO through his binoculars for over an hour during Mantell's flight. This guy knew weather balloons, and as the commanding officer for an entire airbase, he didn't have time to stand around observing a weather balloon. What's important here is the behavior. Mantell's last radio transmission was, "My God, I see people in this thing." According to Mantell's instrument panel, he had stayed up for over an hour after his plane had run out of fuel. A farmer who witnessed the crash said that as the plane fell and reached about 40 feet, it was suddenly enveloped in bright white light. Then the plane fell out of the light, flat, no longer spinning as before. Mantell died because his shoulder straps broke. He was thrown forward, and the control stick punctured his chest. Had the straps not broken, judging from the remarkably undamaged condition of the plane, Mantell might have survived. There was no damage to surrounding bushes, trees, or ground. There were no scrapes on the bottom of the plane. Clearly, there had been no forward or sideways motion. The plane had been rather gently dropped from a height of about 40 feet. A plane spinning down from 30,000 feet would have been completely demolished along with Mantell and the almost intact watch. Extraordinary sightings of similarly shaped UFOs were seen throughout the next several days over adjoining states. Some of the objects were seen traveling at incredible speeds. The events of this case are well documented in public and military records.